Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever feel like your brain is playing tug of war between staying focused and switching gears? You know, that constant battle between sticking to one thing and being able to adapt when things change. Well, this new study dives right into that mental challenge. This paper asks a super interesting question. Is our brain's ability to stay stable on one task and switch to another a simple either-or situation? Or can these two important control modes, flexibility and stability, work differently depending on what kind of information we're dealing with? Think of it like this. Is the struggle the same when you are trying not to get distracted by something related to your current task as it is when the distraction comes from a completely different task you might need to switch to? The researchers here believe the answer is no, and they designed some clever experiments to prove it. They call this the flexibility-stability trade-off. Traditionally, scientists thought that if you are really good at staying stable and focused, you are probably not going to be as good at switching tasks quickly, and vice versa. But some recent research has thrown a wrench in that idea, suggesting maybe we can be both. This paper's big idea is that maybe the trade-off only exists at certain levels of how our brain processes information. They created a new way to test this by making participants switch between two different tasks, like sorting animals versus sorting plants, while ignoring distracting images. The key was that these distractions could be related to the current task or the other task. So how did they actually test this? In experiments 1 and 2, they had people do two tasks. One task involved categorizing words related to animals or plants. The tricky part was that these words appeared on top of images of either animals or plants. If an animal word appeared on an animal image, that was called within task interference. If an animal word appeared on a plant image, that was between task interference. They were looking at how long it took people to respond and how many mistakes they made. They also looked at whether the person was repeating the same task or switching to the other one. Think about it this way. Imagine you are trying to sort pictures of fruits and vegetables. If you see a picture of an apple with a label that says apple, and you are supposed to be sorting fruits, that is one kind of distraction or interference. But if you see that same apple picture with a label that says carrot, and you are supposed to be sorting vegetables, that is a different kind of interference. The researchers weren't just measuring performance on the current trial, but they also looked at what happened on the previous trial. They suspected that how well someone handled a distraction on the last trial might affect how well they could switch tasks on the current trial. Now, here is where it gets really interesting. They discovered that it is much harder to ignore distractions that are related to the task you are currently doing. It is like your brain has already decided this information is relevant, so it is tough to just shut it off. But they found that people were much better at ignoring distractions that came from the other task. This is the first piece of evidence for what they call shielding at the task level. It means your brain can effectively put up a shield against information related to tasks you are not currently doing. But here is the kicker, and this is where the trade-off comes in. When people were really good at shielding themselves from those distracting images from the other task on the previous trial, they actually performed worse when they had to switch to that other task on the current trial. This suggests that by being super stable and shielding really well in the past, you might be making yourself less flexible for the future. It is like building a strong wall makes it harder to open the gate later on. This interaction where successful shielding in one trial made switching harder in the next was a consistent finding across their experiments. They then replicated these findings in experiment 2, making the distractions even more subtle to see if the same pattern held. And guess what? It did. The results pretty much mirrored experiment 1. They still saw that people were much better at ignoring distractions from the task they weren't currently doing, and that this better stability in the previous trial came at a cost to flexibility, making it harder to switch tasks later on. In experiment 3, they changed things up a bit. Instead of using generic images as distractions, they used actual letters and numbers that could also be targets in the other task. The idea was to see if that task-level shielding would still work, or if the specific items themselves, being present in both tasks, would create interference at a deeper level. What they found here was that even though they could still see this trade-off effect between trials, meaning shielding in the past impacted switching, the ability to completely block out distractions from the other task seemed to break down. It looked like learned associations between those specific letters and numbers, and their responses were automatically kicking in, even if the task level shield was up. This suggests that while we can shield at the task level, when the distractions are specific items from the other task, that shielding isn't perfect and can be bypassed by automatic responses. So, what is the big takeaway here? The researchers argue that flexibility and stability aren't just one thing, they can be regulated differently, depending on whether the interference is at the general task level or at the more specific stimulus or response level. They found strong evidence for a flexibility trade-off at the task level. Being too stable and shielding too effectively in one trial makes you less flexible for switching into that task. In the next, this is a really important distinction. In many traditional task switching studies, researchers use stimuli that have features from both tasks, making it impossible to shield effectively. But in this study, by using distractions that were exclusively from the other task, they could isolate this shielding effect. This shielding improved performance when repeating a task but hurt performance when switching to that previously shielded task. They even noted that they didn't find the typical interactions seen in other studies where the difficulty of distinguishing between tasks' congruency was worse on switch trials compared to repeat trials. They think this is because their method successfully separated the interference happening at the task level from interference happening at the stimulus or response level. Basically, the study suggests that when we can effectively shield against distractions from an alternative task, we build up a kind of cognitive stability. This stability is great for staying focused when we're engaged in our current task. However, this very stability can make it harder to become flexible and switch gears to that previously shielded task. It's like if you've been holding your breath behind a strong shield, it takes more effort to exhale and engage with something new. This research offers a more nuanced view of cognitive control. It moves beyond the simple idea that flexibility and stability are always inversely related. Instead, it highlights that how we manage this balance can depend on the nature of the cognitive conflict we're facing. The implication for us is that while our brains are incredibly adaptive, excelling at both focus and switching, there are these fascinating limits and trade-offs happening at different processing levels. Understanding these trade-offs could help us figure out why we sometimes struggle with procrastination or why switching tasks can feel so draining. It opens the door for future research to explore how we can better manage this balance. Perhaps by training different levels of cognitive control independently. What I find fascinating is how they manage to isolate these different levels of processing. It's a subtle but crucial point. The fact that shielding against between-task distractors in the previous trial seems to directly impair flexibility in the next is a powerful demonstration of this trade-off. It's not just about being generally good or bad at switching, it is about how our immediate past cognitive state, shaped by moments of intense focus or shielding, directly impacts our future ability to adapt. It really emphasizes the dynamic nature of cognitive control. Now, one limitation to keep in mind is that while they found this effect repeatedly, the specific stimuli used might have limitations. For example, in experiments 1 and 2, they used generic images as distractors. In experiment 3, they used specific letters and numbers. While this is a smart way to test different levels, it does mean the exact type of interference and shielding might differ slightly. The researchers themselves acknowledge this, noting that in experiment 3, while the task-level trade-off was still apparent, specific stimulus-response associations seemed to bypass some of that shielding. Ultimately, this study gives us a deeper understanding of the intricate dance between stability and flexibility in our minds. It suggests that by being really good at one thing, like shielding, we might inadvertently make another thing, like switching, a bit harder. It's a reminder that our cognitive resources are precious and our brains are constantly making these complex calculations. For future research, it will be interesting to see how external factors like stress or motivation might influence this task-level trade-off and whether we can learn to optimize both stability and flexibility across different cognitive demands. What are your thoughts on this flexibility trade-off? Do you notice this in your own daily life? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into cognitive control, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the workings of the mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.